Good morning. Having discussed the different melachot on Yom Tov, which are permissible, which are not, and the differences to Shabbat, now we move on to discuss Mukseh on Yom Tov. So Mukseh on Shabbat is a prohibition from the Hachamim. A number of reasons are given for Mukseh, but mainly it's because of a kind of safeguarding, so a person doesn't come to do melacha on Shabbat, or to create an environment of Shabbat, because if people were allowed to move many items, then they would end up tidying their houses and just moving things around their house on Shabbat. Therefore, Hachamim forbade to move certain items on Shabbat. And basically, the laws of Mukseh apply on Yom Tov equally to Shabbat. And so all the categories of Mukseh of Shabbat also apply on Yom Tov. There are, however, two exceptions to this. Firstly, is that foods, many, not necessarily all the foods which are Mukseh on Shabbat are Mukseh on Yom Tov. So generally speaking, on Shabbat, foods which are raw and are not able to be cooked on Shabbat because you can't cook on Shabbat are Mukseh. So flour is Mukseh, raw meat is Mukseh, and so on. These kinds of foods, because they're raw, or raw potatoes which are not edible raw, not any kind of food which is not edible raw and needs to be cooked in order to be made edible is Mukseh on Shabbat generally, because you've got to do with it. It's Mukseh mehamad gufa. What can you do with it? You can't cook it on Shabbat. So therefore it becomes Mukseh. On Yom Tov, of course, this doesn't apply, because you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov, and therefore you're allowed to bake on Yom Tov. Therefore, flour can't be Mukseh because I might want to bake with it on Yom Tov, and also all the utensils are permissible. So therefore, grater, masher, like a bowl to knead the dough in. All of these kinds of things on Shabbat would certainly be Mukseh. There would be kli shemelachto leisur, utensils, primary purposes or something prohibited. On Yom Tov won't be Mukseh, because these things can be used with the caveats which we've explained over the past few weeks. They can technically be used, and therefore they cannot be Mukseh if they can be used, because the whole idea of Mukseh is you set it aside in your head, but this you don't set aside in your head because it's something which you may use on Yom Tov. Therefore, these things cannot be Mukseh. Secondly, is that we find a heter on Yom Tov, that one is allowed to move Mukseh normally and directly of any kind of unusual manner if it's to get to food which is permissible to be eaten on Yom Tov. So let's say you have a bowl of fruit, and on top of the bowl of fruit, someone's put something Mukseh there, or someone left a phone there, or someone left some money on a purse on the food, or a card on the food, credit card on the food. Normally on Shabbat, you wouldn't be able to lift up the phone and then serve the food. You would have to either do it in an unusual manner, shake it off with a shinoi, or do it indirectly by lifting up the fruit and thereby allowing the phone to fall. On Yom Tov, however, because it's for Ochel Nefesh, one can directly and normally pick it up, the Mukseh item, and move it away in order to get to the food, even though it's Mukseh. Because of Ochel Nefesh, because of the concept of food, one's allowed to do that. And so any kind of food which is covered by something Mukseh, is being blocked by something Mukseh, on Shabbat cannot be moved normally or directly, but on Yom Tov one can normally and directly lift it up and move it away to get to the food which is edible on Yom Tov. This doesn't mean that one's allowed that all food isn't Mukseh on Yom Tov. Let's just make that very clear. Of course, there are certain foods which are Mukseh even on Yom Tov. And the classical example is the Bitzah Shenolda, the egg which was born on Yom Tov. That's obviously Mukseh. That then obviously you can't move things for that, because that is Mukseh in its own right. A non-Jew who got some fish on Yom Tov and brings it to you, your next door neighbor went to buy some fish which was trapped on Yom Tov, which was caught on Yom Tov, and brings it to you, you can't eat that, because unless you know for sure it was from before Yom Tov caught, because those are Mukseh. And so, in conclusion, Mukseh is generally forbidden on Yom Tov like on Shabbat, unless number one, it's got to do with foods, then they're not Mukseh, or food utensils, they're not Mukseh. And secondly, in order to get to food which is edible on Yom Tov, one may move Mukseh normally and directly.